Welcome into Carps Corner. Big time news in the NFL. Trades happening galore. We're not even to the free agency period yet. There's all kinds of things that are happening. Quarterbacks flying all over the place. Quarterbacks re-signing an Aaron Rodgers, and maybe some elite defensive players finally on the move. What Hall of Fame quarterbacks think about guys filling their shoes. We've got a big news with one of the most respected players in the game, at least in my opinion, stepping away and finally retiring from the game after 7 years. And then lastly, college players stepping away as well, and his reasons for doing so and how that ultimately looked and what went in to his decision. I want to start off, though, with this. Carson Wentz gets traded. Indianapolis Colts, couple of third-round picks, maybe convertible to a second. He goes out to the Washington Commanders. Man, that feels weird. I don't know if I'm ever going to get used to it. I'd almost prefer the Washington football team. And so with that void being left with the Indianapolis Colts, in my opinion, one of the better rosters that you're going to find in all of the NFL, who is going to be the quarterback that they need in that place? And so as you look at this, there's a lot of great things that Carson Wentz did. He has a really, really high ceiling. And that is why Washington ultimately made the move. That's why Indy made the move for him. Now we can talk about his off the field stuff, and maybe he's not a great leader. And is he a little aloof? Do teammates really follow him? But even outside of that, the problem is, with Carson Wentz on the field, if you have a really, really good roster, you don't necessarily need a quarterback who's going to go out there and be Aaron Rodgers, a guy who's going to go out there and be Brett Favre or Russell Wilson, or Justin Herbert. Sometimes you just need a guy who's not going to screw it up for you. And that's all Indy has needed. You look at this going back to Andrew Luck. I mean, the guys they've rotated through there, even looking at, a guy like Jacoby Brissett, they were a decent football team with him, because he just managed the downside. And so while Carson Wentz, you look at his best plays, Aaron Rodgers-esque. He's eluding traffic. He's using that big arm, throwing the ball down the field, making plays, stepping up, scrambling. He's a great athlete. Like, he checks all of the boxes that you want in physical attributes for a quarterback. The problem is you look at his negative plays. The downside of Carson Wentz, and all you had to do is go back and look, at his Jacksonville game, final game of the season. They're 2 touchdown favorites, and they end up losing the game outright. And that game gets them into the playoffs should they win. And so that is the downside of Carson Wentz. And that is probably the biggest problem and his biggest flaw, is the fact you go and look through his lowlights, and it's him switching the ball into his left hand, trying to throw it while he's getting sacked. It gets intercepted basically on the goal line and walked in for a touchdown. And then you see the plays where he's literally bottled up, escapes, slides out of the pocket, looks down the field, and drops a dime. And so you get both of those things when you get Carson Wentz. It's a little bit like Jameis Winston. He's a better athlete than Jameis Winston is, but he's got some of the same traits. He doesn't throw nearly as many interceptions, but he makes those big plays. But then the biggest moments, he also lets you down. In the must-win games, he hasn't quite been there. At least he wasn't last year. And then when you combine that with apparently the off the field, the leadership elements of it, and what the Colts were ultimately looking for, thought it was time to move on. And they got some compensation back. So good for Frank Reich. Good for Chris Ballard. I'm not going to sit here and praise those guys, especially Ballard, because I think he's done a pretty good job managing that roster and building it, but he hasn't been able to get the quarterback right. And so this is his time. So you've got a guy like this, Carson Wentz, who's up and down. 2 guys come to mind who would be able to fill that void. And I know one of them is going to be available. Both of these guys are not sexy quarterbacks. They're not guys that are going to go out there and wow you with their physical attributes. They're really consistent. They make plays. They've gotten their teams in the playoffs. They've had success in the playoffs for the most part. One guy you might say isn't a big game quarterback, but he has debunked that a little bit. He's got some pretty good weapons. And I'm talking about Kirk Cousins, and I'm talking about Jimmy G. Kirk Cousins has been good while he's been up in Minnesota. He doesn't really turn the football over. He seems to make good decisions. People get upset that he throws it away, and maybe he'll take some sacks like this, but he doesn't really make those big negative plays. Doesn't make a lot of flashy ones. And you talk about his late game heroics, and is he a clutch player, big time Monday night prime time guy? And they roll out all the stats about that and how bad he's been at those moments. And there's a lot of evidence to back that up. The Colts have a heck of a roster, offensively and defensively, and they're in a very winnable division. You look at Jimmy Garoppolo. What's he bringing to the table? Jimmy Garoppolo has been to the NFC Championship. He's been to a Super Bowl in the last handful of years. He's been pretty darn good. Now, you can argue he throws an inopportune interception from time to time. Maybe he's not the guy to get you over the hump. The Colts right now, they're just trying to get up halfway up the mountain. They're trying to start that climb. They can't engage in it because they can't get in the playoffs. They can't win the division. And so Jimmy G gets you there. He gets you there, and he gets you a little way up. I don't know if you could win a Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo, but I know you'll be in contention for it, especially with that roster you have with the Colts. You're like, look at the roster he has in San Fran. Yeah, he's got a good running game. Deebo Samuel, Kittle, he's got some good weapons there, but look at what the weapons they have. Pittman's really good. They've got Jonathan Taylor, one of the best running backs, really good offensive line, really solid defense in a very winnable division. Like, checks all the boxes. And so as you compare Jimmy G to Carson Wentz is going to win the physical attributes every time. But that's not the guy you need if you're the Indianapolis Colts. The guy you need to start with is a guy like Jimmy G. Maybe a Kirk Cousins. I prefer Jimmy G because I think he's going to be available in this situation. And I think he's someone that can take the Indianapolis Colts and put them to a degree of relevancy in a very, very crowded AFC. The good news for the Colts, like I said, is that they're in a division that's the least crowded of all of them. Houston's in a rebuild. Tennessee, they got Ryan Tannehill. They're good, but no one's going to say that they're insurmountable. And then you have Jacksonville, who has a new coach. They have Trevor Lawrence, and they've got some pieces. But let's face it, there's a reason why they're drafting at the top of the draft. So one guy right here, another guy right here. If you're Indy, you just need this. You just need the stability. And by the way, the Colts have had a different starting quarterback every season for the last 6 years. So chew on that for a little bit. Some of the other big quarterback news, Russell Wilson to Denver. Now, I think this, for Russell Wilson, this could be a Matt Stafford type of year. I'm not going to go out today and say the Denver Broncos are going to win the Super Bowl, but they have a great roster, fresh change of scenery. I don't think Russell was fully appreciated. He's in Seattle. They've been good. They've made it to a Super Bowl. They won a Super Bowl. He's checked a lot of boxes. But I don't know if people fully appreciate some of the things he does. He's got some negatives. He'll hold on the ball too long, and maybe he tries to buy a little too much time. And the whole let Russ cook thing, I think, took over a little bit. But when they had some talent around him in Seattle, they were rolling. They were pretty darn good. When Matt Stafford had some talent around him in Detroit, he was rolling. They were rolling. They were pretty good. You put him on a team with a competent coach. I think Hackett's going to do a good job there. They've got a good system. I think it'll fit what Russ does well. And then can I interest you in a Melvin Gordon at running back, a Jerry Jeudy at wide receiver, a Cortland Sutton at wide receiver, KJ Hamler at wide receiver, a pretty good offensive line, and the third ranked scoring defense in the NFL. That is what Russ is walking into. It's very similar to what Matthew Stafford walked into, and then what he ultimately had as well at the end of the season with the additions of Odell Beckham Jr. and Von Miller. Stafford, Detroit to LA, Russ, Seattle to Denver. Don't get that Seattle team confused with what they were 3, 4, 6 years ago. Far different. This was a roster that he was carrying, and maybe he tried to buy a little too much time, tried to run around a little bit too much, got a little bit too cute at times, but he was doing all that to win because they were deficient on offense and their defense had been slowly fading. And so Russ had to do those things. So expect a big year for Russ, just like Matt Stafford. He became one of the dark horses and then the favorites to win the MVP. I think you could see Russell Wilson put him in that same category with what he's able to do. No, it's a tough division. I know there's a lot of things going on, But sometimes a change of scenery and elite offensive weapons around you, and he's going to have that defense. And albeit a lot of those defensive stats were compiled with Von Miller the first half of the season, but he's going to have that defense to be able to carry him and help him when they do struggle a little bit. So for some mile-high success, look to the Rustler to pull the Matt Stafford, the Matthew Stafford in Denver. I like it. That's where I'm going to put my money. Other quarterback news, all about the quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers goes back to Green Bay. And everybody's got to weigh in on it. And I think this kind of sums it up more than anything else. Aaron talked about how he didn't want to have this thing drag on forever. And people were complaining because, you know what, he made his decision, the day before tag day, a week before free agency. And that was too long for all of us. No one was happy with it. Well, he had as much time as he wanted. And I guess it's all relative to how long you're asking people to wait. There's a guy who was in Green Bay for a long time, or number 4, who drug that thing out later in his career every year. It was the dog and pony show. People were all the way down in Mississippi trying to figure out, is Brett Favre going to come back every year? Jared Allen's down there begging for him to come back. The Silver Fox, when he was playing even in Minnesota, to try to get him to return. But all that started in Green Bay. So Aaron got all that off his plate. But Brett Favre wanted to weigh in on Aaron Rodgers' situation. I think Brett understands this as well as anybody. He wanted to leave Green Bay because he didn't think they were in a good spot to win. They had drafted Aaron. And I think, in all fairness too, Brett saw how good Aaron was ultimately going to be. Maybe he didn't anticipate this, but he knew that there was a good chance that Aaron Rodgers was going to be a really, really good quarterback. He had all the skills. You could see it in practice. You could see it when he came in for him in relief when I was playing with the Cowboys and we knocked Favre out on a Thursday night. So Brett Favre comes out and said, hey, this is why Aaron Rodgers returned to Green Bay. Frankly, it was his best chance to win a Super Bowl. Russ was in Denver. He's going there now. Nathaniel Hackett, was with Rodgers up in Green Bay. Could have went to Denver, going to the AFC, learning a whole new conference that you're not nearly as familiar with. It's very crowded over there. If you look at Green Bay's roster, they're just as good as anybody you're going to find in the NFC. Now, ultimately, does Aaron Rodgers have to win a Super Bowl to justify all this and everything? And, whatever the new contract details look like, I don't think he has to win one. He's got to get there. He's been close. He's gotten to some championship games. He's lost to some really good teams. He's on the doorstep. But Brett knows that this is his best chance to win. And ultimately, I think that's what Aaron felt too. Wanted to come back, stay with one team for the entirety of his career. And it's easy when that place is ultimately the best place for you to go because it's the place you're going to naturally go to win, have the best chance to win the most games. And so I think that helped provide some clarity to Aaron for his return. And so Favre had to weigh in on it. And so Aaron Rodgers is going to be back in Green Bay, making his home there. Another huge trade, not involving quarterbacks. Khalil Mack leaving the Chicago Bears, going to the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, we all remember when the Bears sent a massive bounty to, at that time, the Oakland Raiders, soon to be the Vegas Raiders, to be able to get him. And then John Gruden lamented not having a pass rusher, but multiple first-round picks, a ton of draft capital went down to Vegas, which they ultimately ended up blowing and not really drafting anybody of Khalil Mack's caliber in multiple attempts. Khalil Mack went to Chicago, played some pretty darn good football. Like a lot of guys, he had some injuries here and there, missed some time. But when he was on the field, he was as dominant as anybody. And especially when he first got there, he was a man on fire and a man on a mission. Well, Chicago now realizes, you know what? We have Justin Fields, got a new coach, new GM. No one's tied to that decision anymore. Probably in a little bit more of a rebuild. And let's start building around Justin Fields. Try to maintain that defense, understanding it's not going to be as good as what it was, because that defense for a couple years there was as dominant as they came. So we're going to ship those pieces off, get some draft capital back, and ultimately start building around our quarterback. That's the Bears side of the story, is they get a second and a 6th round pick. The opposite side of the story for the Los Angeles Chargers, for the Khalil Mack trade, this is what they're going to get. They're getting Khalil Mack, who is one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. They're going to pair him with Joey Bosa. And for my money, that gives them the best pair of edge rushers in the NFL, bar none. Case closed. Those two guys, pair them together. They're double-digit sack dudes on opposite sides. They're both still, Joey's definitely still in his prime, and I think Khalil is still hanging in there as well. Gotten a little bit older, but I think he'll be able to stay healthy. He should be in a good spot. And here is why the Chargers ultimately had to make this move. Russell Wilson just got traded to the Denver Broncos. You have Pat Mahomes, who is sitting there in Kansas City. Now, if you're the Chargers, you have Justin Herbert, and you feel pretty good about him going forward. You feel pretty good about re-signing Mike Williams in your offense and what that's going to look like. These two guys will be able to contain two of the slipperiest quarterbacks in the NFL. They love to get Russ out on the move, get him sliding around, using his athleticism. Pat Mahomes buys time better than anybody. But you saw in the Super Bowl against Tampa, when you had elite pressure on him, what that ultimately did to him. Those guys struggle getting to him with 4 guys. And now you're going to have Khalil Mack and Nick Bosa for the Los Angeles Chargers terrorizing the AFC West. And you have to do it because of, like I said, those 2 quarterbacks that you have. And teams build their rosters to be able to compete against their divisions. Because why? You play against those teams 6 times a year. Now, I understand we added a 17th game this season, so it's a lesser percentage of the schedule than it's ever been. But if you can find a way to go 4-2 in your division every year, you've got a good shot at winning it. You go 5-1, even better. And so you have to construct a team to be able to handle the skill sets of the teams that you are playing. Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack will be able to significantly upgrade that Chargers defense and be able to attack Russell Wilson and Pat Mahomes. You heard it here. And that's why they did it. They got a great value in it. Bears get some draft capital coming back. But the Los Angeles Chargers, put them on blast. They're right there getting it done and in a big way. Now, saying goodbye to really a true American hero. Pat Tillman was a guy that I really looked up to. And he was a guy who turned down a ton of money, an opportunity to continue to live his dream for the Atlanta Falcons, to go serve and become an Army Ranger and ultimately give his life for our country. A guy who did a lot of those same things and just in a reverse order. And Alejandro Villanueva plays at West Point, goes and serves his time and serves his country and his commitment to the United States Armed Forces, does multiple tours in Afghanistan, I believe 3. And he wasn't over there pushing papers, folks. This guy had a rifle on his arm, and he was going around and he was putting himself in harm's way. Alejandro Villanueva comes back, ultimately wins the starting tackle job for the Pittsburgh Steelers, makes a couple of Pro Bowls, and then in his 7th season goes and plays for the Baltimore Ravens. And this year, Baltimore, they're falling apart. They had injuries all over the place, the running back position. DBs were beat up at the end of the year. Lamar Jackson had COVID stuff up and down. He had some injuries. Like a lighthouse in the storm, Alejandro Villanueva was there starting every game. They said he was a leader during that entire time, inspiring his teammates, going out there and grinding each and every week, grinding each and every day. I heard some people on Twitter talk, gosh, seemed like he retired early. I'm like, he was 33 years old. And listen, just because he only played for 7 years, serving overseas and doing what he did, serving multiple tours in Afghanistan. This guy, this is the stuff of legend. I'm of the Charles Barkley school of thought. I don't look up to athletes, and I know a lot of kids do. And I guess once you get there, you realize how flawed all of these humans are. I realized how flawed I was. And I'm thinking, my goodness, I hope kids aren't looking up to me. And you know that they are. They're looking up to Pat Mahomes, and they're looking up to guys like that. But this is a guy who transcends the athlete mold. And I don't think that it's being talked about enough. The service that Alejandro Villanueva gave to our country, going to West Point, serving overseas, coming back, playing 7 years in the NFL, having an immense pride in everything that he's done, and working with the military for soldiers returning home. And that was a huge, huge area of interest for him to try to have a impact and a social impact on soldiers returning home and how we're taking care of our troops and all of those things, because he lived it. He was there. He understood it. So I could not give a bigger thank you to anyone than Alejandro Villanueva for 7 seasons in the NFL, but more importantly, the service that he gave to our country. He did it without complaining and did it in a big way. So with that, I'm going to dovetail into something that I saw. Quinnipiac poll that came out earlier this week, and we've got Russia and Ukraine, and this isn't a political thing. And this is really more of a testament to Alejandro Villanueva and everything that he's about. He's going and serving, and instead of trying to pursue the NFL first, serves his country and then goes and plays in the NFL, a la Rodgers Staubach. But a Quinnipiac poll about the Russia-Ukraine invasion, a lot of questions were asked, but there's one in particular. They break it out by age group. If you were in the same position as the Ukrainians are now, do you think you would stay and fight or flee your country? 55% of Americans said they would stay and fight. That's encouraging. Here's what's discouraging. They break it down by age. 50 to 64-year-olds, 66% would stay and fight. 35 to 49, that's where I fall. 57 would stay and fight. Still above half, close to 60. We're doing all right. That's men and women. 18 to 34, the most able-bodied, healthy people you're going to find. Only 45% said they would stay and fight, while 48% said they would flee. Alejandro Villanueva is fallen into that first category. Not only did he choose to go fight overseas and fulfill his obligation and service to our country, but he did it before he even played in the NFL. He had other options, and he falls into that 18 to 34 demo. And so while I'm a little disheartened by that news and what it is, because I'd like to believe that I would stay and fight. I'd like to believe a lot of people that I know would stay and fight for this lovely country that has afforded us so many unbelievable opportunities. I know Alejandro Villanueva would. He would be a guy that would be first in the battle, and he would be a guy that I would follow. So thank you for your service, sir, in spite of a generation that doesn't seem to value it and our freedoms and our liberties quite the same way. One last piece to get to, and it's a little bit of an emotional thing. It's going to be tough. Harry Miller, Ohio State offensive lineman, interior offensive lineman, guard center for the Buckeyes, just announced his retirement from football and athletics. And we hear this a lot now, due to injury. A lengthy post that he put out on social media, talking about, he battled some injuries, missed some season a year ago, but then he was trying to get back. And a lot of people thought he'd be ready to go this spring. Hadn't been around, hadn't been practicing. And then it comes out, he's retiring for health reasons, thinking, okay, maybe a complication from this injury. No, it's a mental health issue. And he starts talking, going through the help and assistance that Ryan Day has given him, but the agony and all of the internal strife and battles that he's had, and talks about attempted suicide and the different thoughts that have run through his head, and understanding like the stress that's on these guys, young players now, it's on professional athletes, and, mental health, like it's a real deal. There's a real element to it. And a lot of guys, especially combative athletes, battle things internally all the time. It's what makes them great competitors. It's what allows them to run into other human beings at full speed without flinching. But those same demons inside of you also kind of control you and do some things off the field. And so, you know what, Harry, I respect what you did. You said you're done. talking about, for your livelihood, for your safety, the support that Ryan Day has given you through this, the thoughts of killing yourself and the attempts and different things like that, man. Football is great. And I believe it's a great developer and sculptor of young men. Probably the greatest thing we have in this society outside of the military. And you give it all up. It's something you've been doing for a long time. Wasn't easy. I'm sure it was very difficult. His desire to come back and play and all those things were very, very strong. But Harry, you did what was best for you. Took some soul searching. I guarantee it was a very, very difficult decision. And so for that, sir, tip my cap and I salute you and say thank you for everything you've done for the Buckeyes. And I wish you the best as you continue your education and look forward to seeing what you're going to be able to do. And I hope that you do some great things moving forward. That's it for this edition, Carps Corner. Thanks for tuning in.